Velkommen til en særudgave af CFL's podcast Ledelsesrummet. I dag har vi en særlig gæst i studiet, nemlig Jennifer Brown. Jennifer er en globalt anerkendt ekspert inden for diversitet, ligestilling og inklusion. På engelsk diversity, equity og inclusion, eller bare DEI. Mit navn er Richard Askland, jeg er Executive Relation Manager i CFL, og jeg har fornøjelsen af at være jeres gæstevært. Jennifer Brown rådgiver nogle af verdens største virksomheder om DEI. Hun er forfatter til flere bøger, herunder bestselleren How to be an Inclusive Leader. Og så har hun udviklet konceptet Courageous Inclusion. Jennifer er rejst til Danmark fra New York for at tale på CFL's topledertræf, og det er en stor glæde, at hun også har sagt ja til at medvirke i Ledelsesrummet, der denne gang kun udgives med lyd. Om lidt skifter jeg over til engelsk og overlader ordet til Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer. Please tell us, what is Courageous Inclusion all about?
Thank you for that question. Courageous inclusion means growing and holding yourself accountable to expand your understanding of who feels included and who doesn't. How do you feel included? And considering the workplace, as we know and as we've learned, many do not feel as included as they could, as they should, and therefore they are distracted from giving their highest and best contributions. So leaders should include this skill, this competency, and display it courageously. And courage is needed because this is new. It's a new language, it's a new skill, and it is still being defined, I think. And that's what I've endeavored to do with my work.
Please tell us about your path into the work with diversity and inclusion.
Thank you for asking. It's not typically a field that you go to school for. But I did study leadership actually and pivoted into this field we call diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, or lots of other names, which we can talk about. But I originally, in my 20s, was an opera singer. And I went to school, to conservatory, and I had a plan for a performance career. But unfortunately, I injured my voice several times and needed surgery and recovered from that somewhat, but your voice is forever changed, less agile, less resilient. And I knew that I would need to find another career. And somebody said, you love the stage. Have you considered being a leadership facilitator? And I hadn't even known about that field. But I stumbled into that. I got another degree in organizational change and leadership and learning and development. And I embarked on a new path that would ultimately be so fulfilling to me because it examines the human potential in an organization. How do people change? How do organizations change? And so I would subsequently found my own company in the space. And it was almost 20 years ago that I've had the company. And now I speak internationally and have 4 books on the topic of inclusive leadership and really give voice. I think I use my voice now to give voice to what has not been voiced in workplaces that are struggling to include all identities and enable the belonging of those identities, because the workplace wasn't built by a diverse group of people, the workplace that we exist in and work in. The other way, so I was meant to use my voice, I think just not as a singer in that respect, but the other way was I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So I have been out. I have a partner of 27 years, Michelle is her name. We live in New York. And but I was very closeted about my identity as an opera singer because I didn't see anyone that had my identity that would talk about it. This has changed a little bit, but not that much, honestly. And then as a person in the corporate world, I did not see a lot of role models. I had to always be the first. So my journey of being fully courageously myself and authentic has been a long journey. And I never forget that. And it's still uncomfortable sometimes as I travel around the world and speak to so many different audiences at different points in their journey of understanding. But I embrace the discomfort because I know it's so important for me to share my story and make sure that people hear it, they see me, and that they are changed by it, I hope.
Your latest book on the subject is called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. It's almost impossible to include an entire book into a podcast. But if you must point out the highlights, what would it be then? And who is the intended audience?
Yes, I always started with the audience, and I had that audience really clear in my mind. This book is for people who might have assumed inclusion and diversity does not pertain to them. They don't understand it. Maybe they're resistant to the idea because they believe perhaps this is an attack on me, or it means that there's going to be less opportunity for me. I really wrote it with that reader in mind and that learner in mind. And also for leaders were my audience too, who have a lot of power and influence, and simultaneously not seeing themselves in the work means that they aren't doing as much as they could. They're not pushing themselves. They're not setting a vision for particularly younger talent. They're not leading in a public way, courageously inclusive way. And therefore, they're missing so much opportunity to be transformed themselves and to update themselves for the future as a future leader. But they're also missing the opportunity to build trust and the best performance from people of all ages, all generations, all identities. We are all existing many of us in a global workforce, global and multi-generational. And this is particularly important for younger generations in the workforce to see, to hear leaders have competency and do so confidently and authentically. So I wrote this book to try to get something very quick, easy to understand, absolutely encouraging into the hands of leaders who are wondering, what do I know about this? I know nothing about this. I had a very privileged life, or I live perhaps in a very homogeneous society, and I think I'm doing all the right things, and I don't know what I'm not thinking about, and I don't know how I'm not changing. They're in unconscious incompetence, and we want to move people into conscious incompetence, and then to conscious competence, and then finally to unconscious competence, right? I love that model. It's a 4-phase model of growth, and it maps beautifully to the 4 phases in the book.
Okay, very good. So just before diving into the model, because I think we're all curious to understand more about the famous model, just parking at what you just said around the performance. So how do you think that the whole courageous inclusion links into, let's say, leadership trainings or leadership programs? Why is that important?
It must be a part, and it should have been a part of every leadership training since the beginning, honestly. But it hasn't been, because I think that those who are building leadership trainings and architecting them, I think they've taught them without the diversity of the workplace in mind. And of course, when you design something and you don't have a diverse group of designers around the table thinking about the topic, you're going to design something that will only work for the people that are sitting around the table designing it. It just sort of stands to reason. So it's nobody's fault, but what it was an unconscious bias, I think, towards a certain identity that is overrepresented in the workplace, not today, but historically, and still actually today in senior leadership. We don't have gender parity. We certainly don't have ethnicity representation that represents today's world and tomorrow's world on a variety of different diversity dimensions, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the work now is to really catch up, to embed courageous inclusion in specific behaviors, actions, practical steps that leaders can take to update the way they lead so that they can they create so much psychological safety and trust that they can unleash what I call the discretionary effort of every person. That discretionary effort we only give if we feel seen and heard, and we have a deep sense of not just purpose, but belonging in a workplace, that connection to that employer, that manager, the work, all of that. We get the best from people. But I think we are losing some of that potential when someone doubts whether they can be something, Can I be a senior leader here? Can I ascend to an executive level? Do I see anyone that looks like me, that shares my identity, both visible and invisible? When we can't see it, we assume that people who identify as we do can't be it. We can't be there. And that breaks the relationship with employers, and it breaks the, I think, the willingness to contribute absolutely everything plus that we have. We don't feel safe enough to do that. And then there's the role of bias, which we'll talk about at the same time, where we have organizations that are unaware that people are having that experience every day. And when you are unaware, it can hurt you when you do not understand that we could be in exactly the same workplace, but having a radically different experience based on the biases that we hear, that we see, that we witness. So that's the riddle that we're trying to resolve, I think, with this work. And we must, because we don't want to lose anyone. We want leaders who have so much trust that people will go the extra mile. And we want to create so much safety for people that they want to do their best thinking with us and for us.
Interesting. And just hearing what you just said, Jennifer, it's super important to incorporate also the whole DEI agenda into the leadership trainings or program. And just for the audience, DEI, the acronym is diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right. So just to be completely sure to understand the model that you just referred to, can you please briefly repeat what are the 4 key elements in the courageous inclusion model and how does it work?
I wanted to build a model because I wanted to make it simple and memorable, and also to give people the space to be where they are. There was a lot of, I think, criticism of leaders that they are behind. And that to me felt discouraging. And I wanted to give people room to be in multiple places. And I am in multiple places on my own model. This is why I created it, because I wanted something that reflected how I see myself as a learner. So the 4 stages are unaware, aware, active, and advocate. And just going through each of those briefly. Unaware, you could also say apathetic. I changed the wording because it felt judgmental, I think, and a little bit negative. I changed it to unaware because that leaves a lot more room for people to not know what they don't know. And this can be everything from the 101 of sexual orientation or ethnicity, the experience of people of different ethnicities, or people with different abilities and disabilities, what their experience is. And it leaves room for some of us, because of the world we grew up in, not to have had exposure to this information. What's important is that we move from unaware to aware into awareness, to the waking up, to the, oh my goodness, I didn't know, I didn't think about that, I didn't understand the language I'm using that might be impacting someone. I didn't understand the history. I don't know what a person in that body and that identity experiences on a day-to-day basis when they walk through their lives. And there is so much there in phase 2, aware. I mean, it is a lifetime of study. And I think many of us should and could dive in more to knowing new people, seeking out different identities in our world. If we live in a homogeneous world, or we live, residentially or in the workplace, thinking about all the different aspects of your world, who have you never known a person from a certain community? And how might you spend more time digitally, virtually, podcasts, TV shows? I mean, the good news is there is so much information now. And it's so readily available that I don't think a leader has an excuse to say, I've never thought about it. I don't know that it exists, and I don't have any responsibility for it. If you're a leader, you must do some homework, and you must, at least understand, I would say, maybe 10 main identities that I talk about, whether that's ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, abilities, age, and also to reflect in aware, who am I? What have I explored? What have I experienced? We each have a diversity story. And often if somebody looks to me like a a white male, for example, of a certain age, I can make a lot of assumptions about who that person is, but there is so much I can't see. And so it even means in phase 2 to check our own biases and challenge who we think people are. And then challenge ourselves to bring more of our full selves and more authentically and show courageously, because maybe we haven't done that. Maybe we haven't told the truth. Maybe we haven't asked for help or support. Maybe we haven't said to our manager, I need this support. Do we have a resource? Here's what I'm struggling with, or here's what I heard, or what I've experienced, or what I believe about my career. So phase 2 is a lot of those kinds of realizations. And then phase 3 is active. It's not good enough to be aware, which is the learning and the deepening and the expanding of our understanding. But activation is, I'm going to say new things. I'm going to use new language. I'm going to begin to have new conversations. I'm going to challenge myself, and it will be uncomfortable. It will be new. It will be awkward. But I want people to understand in active, they have permission, and they must be in it and try and experiment and have growth mindset. I love that book. Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck is a classic business book. And that sort of step forward, step back, learning, getting feedback, changing, growing, being vulnerable, being honest, being transparent about your journey. All of that, I think, is what younger generations want to know you're doing, and they want to see and hear that. And that can feel extremely vulnerable for those of us who were raised in an era that we were not allowed to be more of who we are. We weren't allowed to have these conversations. It wasn't appropriate. It wasn't professional. So we have a lot of biases about the very skills and competencies that I'm talking about. But anytime you doubt that this is important, speak to the Gen Z, younger talent, the people in your family, the young people, what they want to see, what they expect, how they talk about it, because they're the ones that we should be cueing off of and learning from in terms of how we want to evolve our leadership. And then finally, advocate is phase 4. And this is sort of an aspirational phase. It is I call this the loud, the insistent, the challenger, the person that's going to make noise and be insistent on understanding, why aren't we doing more? What are we doing? How are we holding ourselves accountable? We're getting distracted, or we need to be better. We need to be more fluent. We need to be more competent. We need to speak more publicly. We need to be more overt and more proactive and really show, instead of just talking about things, actually show our commitment. And this is it's aspirational because I think it's very hard to be there all the time, and it's hard to be there alone. People like me and so many others that I love and admire are usually the only. They're the only in a room that's doing advocate level conversation. So allyship is about getting more people ready to perform at that level so that they are informed, they've gone through the steps, they understand what they need to say, they know when to say it, they know how to bring something up, so that somebody like me, if I'm in that room, I don't always have to notice that I'm the only woman in the room. I don't always have to be the one that's raising what's missing or what we're missing, what we're not doing inclusively. But often and historically, if you're even in the room, you're the only one that raises it. So what we want at that 4th phase is more advocates, but it's a journey. That is, to me, the product of a lot of introspection, homework, diligence, building a muscle. It doesn't happen overnight. And that's why I like the model, because we can sort of see where we are. We can choose where to grow. We can have growth spurts, and then we can pause and reflect. So there really isn't a timeline. There's no completion. It is just literally kind of saying, okay, I did something good today. I did something that caused me to grow. I had a hard conversation. I tried something new. This is the feedback I got, and here's how I'm going to try it again. That is the only way we really build that new competency.
It's a great logic, and it definitely makes sense when you look at the model and the different stages. And I was just thinking, let's say that one reaches the the third level, so being very active, would that be okay to park at that level, or should we all as individuals strive at getting at perfectum or the advocate level, as you were explaining, making disruptions and stuff like that?
Yeah, I love that. It's not like reaching and perfection. Even advocate level is never that, because it's as soon as you think you've got something, you're reminded to be humble. I mean, I'm in the LGBTQ community, and just as an example, have been an advocate and a recognized voice in that community. And I feel like I'm going back to the beginning all the time, based on how language is changing, how the younger generation wants to be referred to, what they care about, how they view their identity. All of that is new to me. And I've been doing this for 20 years. So I just always want to say, I'm learning along with everyone. I don't ever paint myself as an expert. I might just have, spent a lot of time thinking about it, and thinking about it perhaps through this lens in a different way. But yes, I'd be happy to have people reach and spend most of their time in active phase 3. I'd be thrilled. That would mean to me, how that would show up is many people challenging themselves every day, giving themselves tasks and goals, reflecting and being uncomfortable in the sort of effort, because if you're not uncomfortable, you're not leading. You're probably not growing. And leaders, it is incumbent on leaders to be uncomfortable constantly. I think we are. That's the definition of the role. If you aren't that, you probably aren't meant for leadership. You're uncomfortable all the time with innovation, with new product launches, with new customers, with new markets. There's so much discomfort in all of that. And yet somehow we're used to that kind of discomfort. But when we talk about this, we don't see it in the same way, but it would be wonderful to see it in the same way. And just say, this is yet another growth opportunity that I have. And I am not a bad person. I'm not imperfect in a bad way. I'm imperfect in a great way. That I am literally going on this journey, and I want to talk about that, and I want to make it real for other people. If I saw a lot of people in phase 3, I would also see a lot of people following that leader and seeing what that leader does on a day-to-day basis and mimicking it. Leaders cast this long shadow, and their every move, their every decision, their choice, what they talk about, what they don't talk about, how real they are. They have the opportunity to change the way leadership has been defined as this command and control, all-knowing kind of leader that we've all kind of grown up with, that no longer resonates. So I'd be happy to see that. I think moving into advocate, maybe not everybody will get there, but I think it would still change so many organizations to have more leaders engaged at phase 3. Learning, growing, doing, trying, being agile, resilient. All of that is sort of the ingredients, I think. And then if somebody kind of moves into advocate level, those few, that's true leadership. And that is probably something that is the culmination of a deep personal commitment. A lot of what we call aha moments, those moments in your life. Maybe you have a child and a dear loved one or someone on your team just change everything for you. And you wake up and you say, I am changed, and I want to pursue this, and I want to be a voice for that, whether it's my experience or someone I love. I want to make sure I leave this workplace better than I found it for the next generation. If you find yourself feeling that is the fuel and the energy, I think, of that 4th phase. So I think that's all available to us.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. So let's be ambitious, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at the all 4 stages, getting to the not to the final end, but let's look at it as a continuum, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I heard you referring to the sample iceberg and also the waterline. So could you put a few words on why is it important to look below the waterline? And what do we find below the waterline?
Yeah. Well, Richard, the metaphor has been around in business forever, right? But I took the iceberg and I delivered probably 200 keynotes since the pandemic started. Lots, and many virtually, and collecting information through the polling that I do which I'm excited to do with you in a little bit. And I always learn, still to this day, different, I probably have 40 identities that are not visible. When we think about that iceberg model, it's 10% of that top of the iceberg, right? And then you should be worried about what you can't see. Organizationally, this means that we should be worried about what we're missing, what we don't know, what people don't trust us enough with, what's going on for someone that is causing struggle and is breaking the belonging that we want them to feel and the trust that we want and need them to feel. And because we don't know it, it can hurt us. It can hurt our relationship, our trust, our organizational performance, keeping and holding the best talent, etc. So I kept being told all these identities. And what I love about, I'll just say what I've added, neurodiversity I've added in the last couple of years, because that's a big conversation that's happening, which is, I think, within the disabilities category, but in particular, neurodiversity speaks to dyslexia, speaks to different ADHD, speaks to the autism spectrum. And I work with tech companies, and they have entire initiatives that are geared towards understanding their neurodiverse talent, how to attract them, how to retain them, who's already in the workforce that's not getting their needs met because of the bias in our design, in our equipment, in our tech, in our lack of awareness, right? That phase one of the continuum. So I've added neurodiversity, I've added caregiving, parenting, and the way, and age, perhaps, and gender, and the way that still influences how women at all life stages are not promoted, not advanced, not thought of as leaders, not thought of for that amazing rotational or global assignment. I've added chronic illness. I've added abilities in terms of mental health as well. Mental health challenges have just come, oh my goodness, so much to me in every room, every industry, every audience, every level. Leaders that look like they have it all together, and I don't even want to say that. It's never true. It is just never true. So for me to be reminded of this as a teacher is really important. And I'm a leader too. And each leader needs to be reminded that all of this can be going on. And what we don't know can really hurt our relationship. And what we then as leaders need to do is lower that waterline, that 10% and the 90% underneath. We have to do the work of saying, well, what would I share about what's under my waterline? And that is uncomfortable and not generationally accepted. I'm Gen X. There's boomers above me. There's millennials below. We know, but this has been changing. The transparency that's expected, that builds inclusion, that builds inclusive workplaces, whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable. To me, it doesn't matter. This is growth. And it's what people want to see, want to hear, to trust you. We cannot bifurcate our personal journey and what might have been challenging for us, where we might have had privileges that have helped us, and understanding how to talk about that, which is really scary for people. I try to do that myself when I speak, so that I can help kind of normalize that. But anyway, the iceberg is just this, you can go so many different ways in it. But what I really want everybody to know, everybody has a diversity story, stories plural. Much of it is invisible. And it is incumbent on all of us to build enough trust so that somebody lowers their waterline with us. That is the mark and the measure of an effective leader in my definition. The more people trust you with who they really are, what they really need, what's getting in the way of their performance, where they don't feel a sense of belonging. If you do not know that as a leader, I think you need to really revisit how you lead, how you stay connected to people, how you build trust. Those are fundamental questions to me. And you can even use the iceberg, Richard, as a tool in exercises, in trainings, in conversations, even one-on-one or as a team. All those kind of ways to open the door to conversation people appreciate. And to me, I've seen it over and over and over again that people feel grateful to be asked. They may be afraid to share, but if they are asked repeatedly and they really believe that the intent is in the right place, they will come forward. And then we can build healthier workplaces for everyone.
In Denmark, DEI is mainly a matter for HR. Perhaps it's the same in US, but do you have any advice on how to get DEI on the top leadership agenda?
It is interesting. DEI has changed over the many years I've been doing it. It can be within HR, talent management. It can be within ESG. Actually, a lot of friends I have lead DEI and ESG for a company. It can be under philanthropy. So structurally, it can report right to the CEO and sit on the executive committee. That latter scenario is what I honestly recommend because it puts it on the leadership agenda. Alignment matters. It sends a message about who should care about this and who it's important to. And so I would recommend, if you're listening to this, how it's aligned and who it reports to is really important. I don't prefer it reporting up to human resources, but it does often. And that's okay. It's not bad. It's a profile question of the work. It is so important that it needs to stand alone, and it needs to be sponsored by the most senior leadership in an organization. That is very, very important. The way, unfortunately, HR, you and I, we love HR. I mean, that's what we do. The perception is reality. And we, like it or not, we want to make sure people see this as an opportunity for growth for them. It's not a compliance exercise. It's not necessarily, people feeling required to do this is not ideal. And it shouldn't come from a place of, I think, and there's lots of strategic HR practitioners. So I don't want to I don't want to repeat the biases about HR in our conversation. HR is so many things. It's so many strategic things. Talent is everything. So, I love it. There are partners. But the thinking is that this is a unique discipline that I think there are people who do it exclusively, and making sure that it's kind of a standalone, whether it's within HR or not, it needs its own importance and profile. And but at the same time, HR is the way that we drive this through the organization. It's a way through training and education and executive development and talent management are all critical partners to this. But you know what? So is sales. So is, I see and work with many clients actually where there are DEI leaders embedded within each of the business units, each of the functions. And they're there to partner with the salespeople and the sales process and clients and make clients smarter about this, because clients are asking. If you have not heard this as an ask or a demand or a requirement from a client, you will. And you may have already gotten it, but you just don't know. You may have lost an opportunity or an RFP that you're bidding on because your company didn't have work underway on this. So I want everyone to hear this, because the accountability for this and the expectation is coming at us from 360 degrees. It's not just workforce, which we've been talking about a lot today. So as you think about this, if your HR is embedded in each of the functions, great. Think about embedding DEI concepts in each of the functions, because whoever you're putting out there to lead the business needs to have a competency in this. And often that they won't have that competency. HR can only reach so many. So come up with creative ways, if you're a small organization, to get, my book, other things into the hands of the folks that are interacting with the world externally, because that's really going to make a difference for your business. And it's going to be, and it is, an expectation.
Jennifer, the final question. So what is the most important thing to get started? So how do we move the needle?
Well, let's understand where we are individually, and then I'll answer your question for the organization. This model, actually, I've been asked many times to do this as an organizational assessment, because you can see how an organization or a function within an organization could be at aware, right? But not at active yet. Or they could be at active, or they could be unaware, honestly, depending on what part of the business, depending on where in the world, right? When we talk about multinational companies, they are like worlds unto themselves, and they have like all kinds of different levels going on. But for an individual, know where you are, know where you're starting from. Look under that waterline of the iceberg. It's in the book. There's probably, 40 different identities under that. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I keep adding as I discover more. But where are you in your learning, in your mastery, in your fluency? And are you uncomfortable often? Or are you really staying safe? Are you really staying in this zone of kind of doing what you've always done, leading in the same way? I hope not. I hope if you're listening to this, you want more for your leadership. You want different. I love that model, start, stop, continue. What are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to continue to invest in? And then put yourself somewhere on this continuum and say, what do I need to change day to day, week to week? Give yourself assignments for learning. Give yourself, commit to new conversations if you're an active. Commit to investigating how trusted you are and how much of an inclusive leader you really are. I will say that we think our impact is a lot more effective than it usually is. And having a conversation to say, my intent is this is where I am. I just learned this model. I think I'm here. I think these are the things that I'm doing that would resonate, but I only will understand my efficacy through someone else's eyes. We are only allies when our efforts hit the mark for someone in our audience, in our team, on the other side of our efforts. That is the only communication is, effective communication is one that matters, right? We always say that. The only inclusive leadership to me is not about necessarily my intent, but how it is improving something for someone who's experiencing different things than we are. So investigate that. And you know what? If somebody doesn't know what you're talking about, if they're not used to, having that conversation, if they're afraid, if they're intimidated, I think that's really good information too. That is how we shift organizational norms so that we have more of these conversations. And then organizationally, I would ask the same question. Where are we in total? Where are we? Do we have a lot of work to do? And I would look at your policies, your practices, the website language that you have on your website, in your marketing materials, in your advertising, the images that you show, the external face, that story that you tell about the importance of inclusion to your organization. Every organization has the opportunity to choose. But then I would say the walk needs to match the talk. So the walk is the internal work of, okay, how are we as a culture, as an environment? And do we need to, all of us, embark on a journey towards greater awareness? And then do we need to make a plan and a strategy and have a DEI strategy? And then do we need training, targeted initiatives, mentoring and sponsoring, what we call affinity groups? Or do we need a DEI council or committee that owns and is tasked with this work to look at the organization and how it's conducting itself on this topic? So those are two kind of next steps, one for the individual leader, and then one for, I think, the organization to assess itself. And then just don't be afraid to say, here's where we are, here's where we aren't, here's where we want to be, and here's what you're going to see over the next 3, 6, 9 months to a year of us trying. This is what us trying looks like. And I think that would be so appreciated, so noticed. And you do not have to be perfect. You don't have to be done. Being finished is not a goal, and it's not even possible. But the effort is greatly appreciated as long as the impact is constantly known and acknowledged and calibrated to impact.
Just do it. Jennifer, it has been a pleasure to have you here in our small studio, and we are all super excited to meet you on stage in a couple of hours. So thanks a lot. Personally, I feel that I'm much wiser than when we started this podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.